A dog is standing over a bowl of meat. It is starving. The dog lowers its head. It begins eating frantically, chewing, swallowing, chewing, swallowing. But the dog never gets full, because the food never reaches its stomach. The meat falls out of a hole cut into its neck, back into the same bowl. Again, and again, and again. The dog eats for hours. Its stomach remains empty. Its hunger never disappears. Meanwhile, glass bottles beside the animal slowly fill with acid draining from its body. By the end of the day, those bottles will be sold as medicine. This wasn't a medieval torture device. This wasn't a secret prison. This wasn't some forgotten experiment from the Dark Ages. This was one of the most respected scientific laboratories on Earth. And the man running it would eventually win a Nobel Prize. His name was Ivan Pavlov. And the story you learned about him is almost entirely wrong. Most people remember Pavlov through a single image. A bell, a dog, a little saliva, a psychology lesson. The story is so simple that it appears in textbooks around the world. Ring a bell, feed a dog. Eventually the dog drools. Classical conditioning. Case closed. But the real history of Pavlov's laboratory looks less like a psychology classroom and more like a Gothic factory, a place where living bodies were surgically redesigned, where dogs became biological machines, where bodily fluids became commercial products, and where scientists attempted something far more ambitious than understanding digestion. They were trying to engineer behavior itself. To understand how this happened, we have to start long before the bell, before the dogs, before the laboratory, before Pavlov became famous. Ivan Pavlov was born in 1849 in the Russian city of Ryazan. He came from a long line of Orthodox priests. For generations, the men in his family had served the church. His future appeared predetermined. He entered theological school. He trained for the priesthood. He was expected to become the next link in a religious chain stretching back generations. Then Russia changed. The 19th century brought an explosion of scientific thought. Darwin's theory of evolution spread across Europe. Physiology promised to explain life through physical laws. A new generation of intellectuals became convinced that mysteries once attributed to God could be explained through biology. Pavlov was captivated. He abandoned theology. He left the seminary, and he devoted himself completely to science. Yet in a strange way, he never stopped being religious. He simply changed gods. Science became the object of absolute devotion. The laboratory became the cathedral, and the search for biological laws became his lifelong faith. Those who worked with Pavlov quickly noticed something unusual. He possessed extraordinary surgical skill. His hands were remarkably precise. He could operate for hours with intense concentration. Other physiologists often studied animals during short experiments before the subjects died. Pavlov wanted something different. He wanted living systems, stable systems, continuous systems. He wanted to observe physiology unfolding day after day, inside conscious animals. To do that, he needed permanent access to the body. And so he began redesigning it. Inside the Institute of Experimental Medicine in St. Petersburg, dogs underwent operations unlike anything most people imagine when they hear the word experiment. Researchers surgically redirected salivary glands. Small openings were created, so secretions could be collected directly into glass tubes. Every drop could be measured. Every fluctuation could be recorded. Nothing was left to guesswork. But saliva was only the beginning. The real breakthrough came from digestion. Pavlov wanted to know exactly how the stomach responded to food. Not after digestion, not indirectly. He wanted direct access. So he developed procedures involving fistulas, surgically created openings that connected internal organs to the outside world. One operation became particularly famous, or infamous, an esophagotomy. The dog's esophagus was divided. A permanent opening was created in the neck. The result was bizarre. The animal could still eat. It could still chew. It could still swallow. But the food never reached the stomach. Instead, it fell from the opening in the neck, back into the bowl. The dog experienced all the sensations of eating. The taste, the chewing, the swallowing, but not the nourishment. Researchers called this sham feeding. The dog could continue eating for extraordinary lengths of time. Meanwhile, another opening allowed scientists to collect gastric secretions directly from the stomach. For physiologists, this was revolutionary. For modern observers, it is difficult not to see something deeply unsettling. The animal had become part of an apparatus, a living component in a larger machine. And then something unexpected happened. The machine started making money. At the turn of the 20th century, digestive disorders were widespread. Doctors searched desperately for treatments. Pavlov's laboratory possessed something valuable: large quantities of gastric juice. At the time, these secretions were believed to have therapeutic value. They contained natural digestive compounds. Demand grew. Production expanded. Rows of dogs were maintained for the collection of gastric fluids. The laboratory distributed what became known as St. Petersburg gastric juice. What began as physiology had become manufacturing. A scientific institution was now operating something that looked remarkably like a biological factory. The dogs generated data. The dogs generated products. The dogs helped finance further research. And yet digestion was never Pavlov's final destination. The stomach was only a doorway. What truly fascinated him was the brain. During his digestive experiments, Pavlov noticed something strange. Sometimes a dog would begin secreting saliva before food arrived. Not after eating. Before. A glimpse of the assistant. The sound of footsteps. A familiar routine. Somehow the body was responding to expectation, to anticipation, to prediction. This phenomenon fascinated him, because if anticipation could alter physiology, then perhaps the brain itself could be studied scientifically. The challenge was that brains are messy. Unlike stomach acid, thoughts cannot be collected in a bottle. The smallest disturbance could alter an experiment. A sound, a smell, a vibration, a passing carriage outside. Everything mattered. So Pavlov attempted something extraordinary. He built an environment designed to eliminate the outside world. Researchers later described these facilities as towers of silence. The structures were engineered to reduce noise and distraction. Soundproof chambers, heavy walls, specialized observation systems. Dogs were isolated from ordinary environmental stimulation, while researchers monitored responses from outside. The goal was simple. If every variable could be controlled, perhaps behavior itself could become predictable. Perhaps the mind could be reduced to inputs and outputs. Stimulus, response, cause, effect. Like machinery. This is where the story most people know begins. But even here, the reality is stranger than the myth. The famous bell. It was never the center of the research. In fact, sudden bells could be disruptive. They startled animals. They introduced unwanted reactions. Pavlov's laboratory used a wide range of signals: metronomes, buzzers, tones, lights, tactile stimuli, complex combinations of sensory cues. The bell survived because it was simple. Simple enough for textbooks. Simple enough for cartoons. Simple enough for generations of students. The real experiments were far more complicated and far more ambitious. Pavlov wasn't interested in teaching a dog to drool. He was trying to uncover the laws governing behavior itself. Could learning be measured? Could responses be predicted? Could the mind be engineered? The deeper he pushed these questions, the darker the experiments became. Researchers explored increasingly difficult conditioning procedures, conflicting signals, stressful stimuli, situations designed to overload established patterns of response. Some animals developed severe disturbances. Behavior became erratic. Previously stable reactions collapsed. The attempt to understand the nervous system sometimes pushed it toward breakdown. For Pavlov, these episodes revealed something important. The brain was not a simple machine. It could fracture under pressure. Its patterns could become unstable. Its responses could become unpredictable. And that unpredictability created a problem, because unpredictability was the enemy of the entire project. The dream of the physiology factory was control. Control of variables. Control of bodies. Control of behavior. Control of life itself. But life kept refusing. Different dogs responded differently. Identical conditions produced different outcomes. Some animals adapted quickly. Others resisted. Some cooperated. Others became stubborn. The same animal could behave differently from one day to the next. Again and again, individuality leaked into the data. No matter how carefully the environment was engineered, no matter how sophisticated the apparatus became, no matter how many measurements were taken, the living subject remained more complicated than the system built to contain it. And that may be the strangest part of Pavlov's story, because the popular version gets the lesson backwards. We are taught that Pavlov proved animals are predictable, that behavior can be programmed, that responses can be manufactured. But if you look closely at the history, another story emerges. A scientist spent decades attempting to reduce life to a set of controllable mechanisms. He built laboratories. He redesigned bodies. He isolated subjects from the outside world. He measured secretions by the drop. He searched for laws as precise as physics. And yet uncertainty never disappeared. The interference remained. Not because the experiments were flawed, not because the measurements were inaccurate, but because living creatures are not machines. The dogs kept reminding him. One learned faster. One became fearful. One resisted. One adapted. One refused. The same stimulus produced different responses. The same animal produced different responses on different days. Individuality survived the factory. And that may be the most important thing the physiology factory ever revealed. Not because Pavlov set out to prove it, but because he spent his entire career trying to prove the opposite. The story of Ivan Pavlov is not really about a bell. It is not even about dogs. It is about one of humanity's oldest ambitions. The belief that if we collect enough data, build sophisticated enough systems, and control enough variables, we can finally turn life into something predictable. More than a century later, that ambition is still alive. The technology has changed. The measurements have changed. The machines have changed. But the dream remains the same. And so does the question. How much of a living creature can you reduce to a machine before you discover that it was never a machine at all?